The Wolf Wilder, Chapter 12. Theo had been riding on Black's back for what felt like several hours when they first spotted the castle. Or rather, not a castle, but the ghost of one. The gate was black and gold, wrought with angels and eagles, and stretched as tall as two men. Set on top of the only hill for miles, it was devastatingly imposing. "But I am not," said Theo, "going to be intimidated by architecture." Theo found a stick and poked it through the gates to test the snow's depth. It had gathered waist-high on the tree-lined path. "A winter's worth," whispered Theo, and except for the bird marks there were no footprints. The chain on the gate, when Theo scraped the snow off, showed a year's worth of rust. "What do you think?" she asked Black. "Does it smell safe?" There was no wind. Theo pushed her hair back and brushed the snow out of her ears, but no sound of any living thing came to her. Around them were snow-thick fields, and the trail the wolves' feet had left. The wolves slid between the bars of the gate. Theo leaned through and balanced the pup on Black's back. "Don't run anywhere, please," she whispered, and then to the pup, "and don't pee on his head." With both hands free, it should have been easy to climb over the spiked railings, but her whole body ached, and she tumbled the last meters. The snow broke her fall, though she ate more of it than she would have liked. Her body was slipping out of her control, she thought. She needed somewhere safe to sleep. She would stay only long enough to recover her breath, to make a plan, and they would be on their way. The fire, as Alexei had said, had not been recent. The trees looked as if they had once been sculpted into the shapes of animals, but now they were sprawling, monstrous shapes, and thickly frosted. Nobody had cleared the autumn leaves before the snow came. Theo sniffed the wall as she approached. The soot barely smelt at all. The castle was a long, low rectangle, with turrets at each side and two balconies, both crumbling and dripping with icicles. The stones were tawny and grey, wolf colours, streaked with the fire's black, and the pillars each side of the doors were caked in soot. Theo lifted the pup off Black's head, where he was squeaking and getting his paws in Black's eyes, and put him on her shoulder. "This," she said, "will do." She struggled through the snow, looking for broken windows at floor level. She found none, so she smashed the compass bowl against the floor-to-ceiling window at the back, and Black followed her through. She took in a high-ceilinged hall with soot-blackened wallpaper and a blackened chandelier chain with no chandelier, but her eyes were aching. She half crawled up the marble staircase, turned into the first room, which turned out to be a study full of smoked books, and curled up on the floor. "I won't sleep for long, I promise," she said to the pup. "Please don't chew my shoes. Or, that's difficult, I know. Please don't eat the walls. I think the soot would be bad for you." The pup pawed at her chin. As gently as she could, Theo pushed him away. "I need to close my eyes, just for a second, Lapushka." Theo woke to find her nose buried in someone's fur. She had woken up like that several hundred times before, and for a moment there was just the peaceful smell of animal skin and firesides. And then, suddenly, the remembrance of the last few days came rushing back over her. The voice inside that said "Mama" woke her up again. Theo jumped to her feet, wincing at the recently defrosted feeling in her toes, and shook herself. White shook herself too, and stopped biting at her bandages. Theo laid a hand on her friend's head, and together they began to explore the mansion. The left side of it was gutted out, exactly as she had imagined fireworking. Nothing much remained, except the stone carvings. But the right side, which seemed to be made mostly of a large library and the little study she had slept in, was more or less untouched, though empty of anything useful, like guns or chairs or clothes. The downstairs was similar. A ballroom on the right side, with smoke-smeared green and golden wallpaper that Theo was grudgingly forced to admire, and exquisite but charred velvet curtains. On the left of the staircase there was a burnt-out kitchen. That must have been where the fire started, she thought, and a charred room that might have been anything. A drawing-room, perhaps, of the sort black and white and grey might have known in their early aristocratic days. The thought of grey rose up, and she pushed it down again. There was a howling from the front door. Black was trying to summon her. "What is it?" Theo glanced around for a weapon. Everything movable seemed to have been taken away by the last owners. "I'm coming." She picked up one of the half-burnt books from the floor, hefted it in her hand, and stepped into the great marble hall. Black was standing at the smashed window. On the other side was a blond boy wrapped in a green cloak. "Ilya!" She ran to him, her boots crunching in the glass, and threw her arms around him. He waited a moment, then gave a little shake like a dog, and she released him. "You hug hard," he said, but he was grinning. "Yes," she said. "I know. I forgot. Sorry, I'm used to wolves. They hug with their teeth." "Well, don't do that either." "No, I won't. Sorry." "Don't be sorry, Theo. We found you." "Here, come in. Not that bit, though. Here, where there's no glass." "Who's we?" For one giddy moment, she thought he meant Grey, but that was impossible. He was pirouetting around the hall. "Alexei said you'd be here, and I knew you'd be all right. People should listen to me more." "Ilya, I have to tell you something." But he shook his head. "I can't stop. I've got to make sure the others don't miss the castle." He turned a somersault on the spot. He was obviously in a holiday, leapfrogging mood. "I said you'd be here." "What others?" "Them." He pushed her to the broken window and pointed. Theo looked. There were only the fields, a few empty summer dacres, and the white humps of trees. But a noise came to her on the air. Not wolves, she thought. Not wind. Not snow. Something else. Something she had never heard before. Over the horizon came a snaking line of children. The children from the village, skiing, running on snowshoes, waving sticks and bats and hands, waving at her. Behind them, Alexei's dark head, with Clara on his shoulders and an axe in his hand. The children's cloaks and coats, blue and green and red, cast coloured light on the snow, bright as her paint box at home. The little ones were singing a marching song. Alexei conducted with his axe. Sergei whooped war cries and waved at the castle with both hands as he came. The adults didn't want to come, so I made a diversion. I danced, actually. I think they thought it was a bit odd, because they were eating, but they watched, and we got away. We've come to get your mother back. I told them the whole... Ilya broke off. He stared. Theo, the wolf witch the other soldiers had talked about in awe, who had not cried when her mother was snatched away, and who had only scowled at snowstorms and guns and ice-cold nights, was shaking. "Theo?" Theo shook her head. She couldn't speak. The moments in which the world turns suddenly kind can feel like a punctured lung. She stood in the marble hall and cried until tears flooded down her nose and chin and dropped onto the heads of the two blood-stained wolves at her feet. It took hours to get everyone inside, and to let them explore, and to dust the soot off the little ones. Hours, too, for Ilya to stop shaking and repeating, "He shot her! He shot Grey!" The two of them walked through the house, avoiding the others, swapping ideas for what they would do to Rakov when they saw him. At last they marshalled the little ones and herded them into the ballroom. There was a small gang of little ones, made of two well-wrapped-up 7-year-old boys, Gregor and Yaniv, and two sisters, Vasilisa and Zoya, huge-eyed and dressed like snow elves in white coats. Sergi shepherded them into place, supremely superior at 8 years old, together with Bogdan, still sniffing. Clara and Jana and Irina, a girl of about 14 with wary eyes. Ilya produced black bread from his sack and some pierogi, buns stuffed with roast pork. There was quite a lot of grabbing and stamping, and then suddenly everyone was sitting on the floor of the ballroom, staring up at Ilya and Theo and Alexei, chewing and listening. "I vote we storm the city," said Alexei. "The adults are still debating about what to do. They might be weeks. We're going to do it now. Or at least soon." "But what about Theo's mama?" said Jana. "It's her we've come to rescue." Alexei looked as though he'd forgotten about that for a moment. Then he recovered his poise. "Exactly. We're doing both at once. We're going to make enough noise and mess and chaos to give Theo time to break into Cresty jail." "We're going to bite the guards," said Sergi, baring his gums. "Like the wolves, only harder." "I was thinking of something a little bit more sophisticated," said Alexei. "Not that biting isn't very much the right kind of thinking." He had been leaning against the doorway, and now he pulled himself up on the doorframe and swung his legs, as if kicking an invisible soldier. "It's not just us out in the country who hate Rakov and his men. He's sent his requisitioners into the city. There are people waiting for a reason to fight. We could give them one." "What, though?" Theo sat on one of the windowsills of the ballroom, the pup in her lap, the wolves at her feet. White was chewing on a half-burnt curtain. "Is Mama the reason to fight?" "Sort of, but I meant you and the wolves. Picture it, Theo. You, standing on a pillar, there's bound to be a pillar somewhere, telling what you did to him. A ski straight in the face. And then you lead the little ones in like an army, march through the streets with the wolves running ahead. Other kids will join us." "Do they know how to march?" said Ilya. He was sitting with his chin on his knees, still giving the occasional post-crime hiccup, but his voice came out firm. "It takes time. I should know." "We'll train them," said Alexei. He punched the air as he spoke, and his enthusiasm swept over them. "Wait until I've taught Vasilisa and Zoya to bite. We can be fierce, you'll see, and we'll start first thing tomorrow." "I need to go soon, though," said Theo. "It's Monday." "The little ones are too tired," said Jana. "Tomorrow?" Theo thought about saying, "I'll go alone," but the remembrance of the wood last night was still too bitter. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow. We'll take the wolves. They might help in the jail." "They won't let a pack of wild wolves into the centre of the city." "Half wild," said Theo. "They might not let any of us into the city," said Jana. "They're stopping people at the gates. Rakov's nervous. They're stopping anyone who looks like they might be an agitator, which means anyone who isn't a duke or a soldier." "We could climb the walls," said Sergi, kicking the wall for good measure. "You can't even climb the old oak, Sergi," said Jana. "Anyway, they'd shoot anyone climbing in, wouldn't they, Alexei?" Theo had ducked behind her hair to think better. Now she emerged. "I think I've got an idea." The idea fizzed in her stomach and ran, tingling, down to her fingertips. "Can anybody sew?" There was a flurry of "whats?" and "whys?" "You're going to sew at Rakov," said Alexei. "That's not really a classic attack strategy, Theo." "Truly, I promise. This is the best idea I've ever had." Eyebrows were raised. "I know how to get into the city. Some of us at least. You said they don't let in agitators. They don't let in people who look ragged. But we all know only aristocrats can afford wolves. So, what if we pretend to be rich? What if I use the wolves as camouflage?" Ilya was staring at her, and his stare was not impressed. "Don't panic, all right, at what I'm about to tell you. Theo, you've gone mad." But Alexei strode forward, slapped Theo on the back, and laughed his whooping laugh. Black and White growled warningly, but it only made him laugh harder. "Do you hear that? That, he said, is what a real idea sounds like. That is the sound of Rakov falling.